Well, based on that, the objection's noted. I'm going to overrule it. We'll go ahead and move forward, but I'll do that on the record.
Very good.
Okay. All right, let's get the panel.
Would the court allow me to clear up the mistake in front of the jury about my reading of the video so that the jury doesn't get the impression I'm trying to hide something? Is that okay? Just to say that I've looked back over it and that I see where some of the seconds play out a little more slowly and then they speed up and my confusion.
As long as it's not testimonial.
It won't be.
You can just say you withdraw the objection.
Okay.
Or you can do that and withdraw your
I'll withdraw
objection.
that portion of the objection.
Let's do that.
For the jury. Please be seated.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I believe we've resolved the matters that were before the court. Mr. Sheffield?
Yes, thank you, Judge. The issue I was having was my belief that we had two separate videos of the same time period. And going back and looking through our records, my confusion stemmed from portions of the video actually play with what appears to be in time. And then it speeds up and it eats up a bunch of time all at once. So I appreciate the opportunity to go back and look at it. It appears there is only one video, and it's quite a roller coaster of how the time plays. So to the extent that we thought there was two, I'll withdraw that objection. Still, though, the objection on being able to authenticate it by the owner of the video. Thank you, Judge.
That's overruled. Go ahead.
Thank you. So with regard to State's Exhibit 115, we've tendered it into evidence, and you were able to review it. Is that correct?
Yes, I probably should on the record say it's admitted. Go
Thank
ahead.
you, Judge. So the exhibit States 115 having been tendered and admitted, did you get a chance at the break to review it again, just
Yes.
briefly?
Yes, ma'am.
And does it have that jerkiness and that speeding up with the seconds?
Yes, it does.
And once again, how much is the timestamp off?
An hour and 5 minutes.
Okay. And was it your understanding that Mr. Olson was not home at the time of the homicide?
Correct.
And this is something he downloaded later?
Correct, yes, ma'am. After the request, he told me, yeah, it's already burning, and provided it.
Okay.
Later.
And you spoke to him personally?
Yes, ma'am.
And you're the one who requested this?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. At this time, the state will publish State's Exhibit 115, and for the record, we're going to do the relevant portions of this long
Just
video.
make sure we get timestamps on the record.
Correct, yes. So for the record, State's Exhibit 115, the state will be starting this on the top where it says Channel 4, 2020, 0223, timestamp 02:07:55 p.m. Is that acceptable, Detective? ending at 2/16/30. All right, so Detective Marcy, we're going to go through and look at some things.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So first off, when we go back, starting again at 2:08:26. We have our timer moving very quickly. Now, this person who's walking up, at this point in time, now, who do you believe that to be?
Mr. Arbery.
Okay. And where's Mr. Arbery right now at 2:09:15?
He's standing in the front yard of 220 Satilla.
And where does he go?
Into the residence.
And is that the image that we saw where the camera angles down like this? The first couple of clips?
It may be, there's no timestamp on what Mr. English provided us. It's a reasonable association.
Stopping at 2:12:21. What is the jury looking at here?
If you look just above the column between the 212, that is Mr. Albenze, the 911 caller walking into frame from his house.
All right, so this is the front porch at 219 Satilla Drive, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. When you went to Mr. Albenze's house, where was his house?
If you go up the road there, the road turns left slightly. His house is in that turn.
Restarting the video. And what's the jury looking at here, stopping it at 2:12:41? In this area right up here.
That's Mr. Albenze calling 911.
And what do we have coming down the street here?
It's a car. I haven't gone and ID'd that car.
Oh, we have a car coming down the street.
Yes, ma'am.
And this is 2:13:38. Starting again. And what happened there?
Mr. Arbery steps out of the front door off the porch and begins running north to the right on Satilla Shores towards 230 Satilla Drive, the McMichael residence.
Okay. So now is that out of the Satilla Shores neighborhood?
No.
Or is that inside?
No, that goes further in.
And is that him continue to run down the street here at 2:13:54?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that also him right there?
Yes, ma'am.
2:14:09, is he out of view at this point?
Yes, ma'am.
What movement do we have up here right under the word view at 2:15:35?
So where the cursor was, as you mentioned below view, there's a white pickup truck pulling out. It's currently 2:15:35. At 2:15:03, you can see movement. Looks like two individuals leaving the residence, getting into that vehicle, and then they leave going the same direction Mr. Arbery did.
All right, so I'm going to back it up to, you said 2:15?
2:15:03.
We're going to start this at 2:14:57?
You see the movement now coming from the house.
And had the truck pulled off at that point?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. How long was it from the time Mr. Arbery cleared off the screen until there was movement at the house coming out?
He steps out of the front door and runs up Satilla Drive. The timestamp I have for him stepping out is 2:13:39.
Mm-hmm.
And then the individuals come out to the truck on camera at 2:15:03. Camera time.
Camera time. So, minute and 20 seconds?
Thereabout.
And then we see the 911 caller coming back down the street, is that
Yes, ma'am.
correct?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to move it forward a little bit and show you one other thing. At 2:21:20, what do we have here?
Georgia Power utility truck.
I apologize, ladies and gentlemen. I apologize, Judge, but cursor and mouse are not working, and I had them fix it at lunch, and it does not seem to have taken the fix. So I'm going to try it again. So what do we have here at 2:27:42?
Wayne County Fire and EMS ambulance and a fire truck.
And starting at 2:34:30, what do we have here?
The Georgia Power utility truck.
What's he doing?
He's going to use the porta potty.
And where's the porta potty?
That's at 220 Satilla Drive.
220 Satilla Drive. So the Georgia Power guy gets out and uses the porta potty at 220 Satilla Drive, and what time is that?
Camera time is 2:35:33.
Where's Mr. Ahmaud Arbery?
I'm trying to do the math in my head for the time difference. He's interacting with the defense in this case.
Okay.
He's not at the residence.
Did you see the fire trucks and EMS go by?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, then you saw him stop.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Is Mr. Arbery lying dead at the time this guy steps onto the property at 220?
It's ridiculous. It's irrelevant. It's the purpose of asking if he's dead at the time somebody's urinating in a porta potty. That's ridiculous.
Your Honor, this is
It's
beyond
inflammatory.
pale. What's the relevance?
The relevance is that people stopped and got onto this property at 2:20, all kinds of people. And this man, who's a Georgia Power employee, stopped to use this porta potty. And all kinds of people come onto this property, and Mr. Arbery's dead because he's going on this property. That's the relevance of this evidence.
That's a closing argument.
So, we'd ask the court to instruct the jury to disregard all of that.
I'm just sustaining the objection. Let's go ahead and move on.
Yes, Judge. And was that the end of the video provided by Mr. Olson to you?
Yes, ma'am.
So now, direct your attention to State's Exhibit 133, the videos provided by Diego Perez to Officer Adam Jackson. Were you also shown those particular videos?
I recall seeing at least one of the videos during the same time we were doing the phone downloads. The thumb drive that was provided to officers out there was brought back to headquarters, and we played one video, at least one video of what was provided.
Okay, so I obviously got the date wrong. So you're talking about the phone downloads that you're doing after the interview with Gregory McMichael on February 23rd, 2020.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so you're still at the headquarters when the Diego Perez jump drive is brought to headquarters?
Yes, ma'am.
And while you're doing the phone download, you got to watch at least one of those videos?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And have you seen the full 10-minute long video that is now State's Exhibit 133?
Yes, ma'am.
And was it fair and accurate and in conjunction with what you had seen on the evening of the 23rd of February?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And I believe this is a joint exhibit, is that correct?
That's correct.
All right, this time the state would tender into evidence State's Exhibit 133.
Understand, it's without objection.
That's correct.
No.
Yeah, submitted.
So Officer or Detective Marcy, what is our time step at the top of State's Exhibit 133?
It's February 23rd, 2020, and it's 1:11:24 p.m.
And to your knowledge, is this off by about 5 minutes?
I recall a discrepancy. I don't know the exact.
Now here at 1:11:59 seconds per this video, what do we have here?
That was Mr. Albenze.
State's Exhibit, or timestamp 1:13:30. Who is that who ran by?
That was Mr. Arbery.
19:13 seconds, what do we have here?
It's a Wayne County patrol vehicle, Wayne County Police Department.
And whose patrol vehicle was that, to your knowledge?
I believe it would be the first on scene, Officer Minshew.
One 2019, what do we have here?
This is Mr. Albenze.
So at the end of that video, cursor there. So that video did not contain any images of the second responding officer, Duggan, coming into the neighborhood.
No, ma'am.
All right. All right, I'm going to direct your attention forward in time now to April 15th of 2020.
Yes, ma'am.
What action did you take on April 15th of 2020?
Prior to the 15th, we had another meeting at our agency.
Without explaining why you were doing what you were doing,
Okay.
What did you do?
I sent the 911 call and the original video from Mr. Bryant's phone of the incident to ROCIC for audio enhancement to see if anything could be cleared up in that.
Okay, so you sent off both the 911 call made by who?
I'm sorry, the 911 call from Mr. Greg McMichael.
Okay, so Mr. McMichael's 911 call, and then Mr. Bryan's cell phone video of the homicide.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So you sent it off on April 15th, 2020. Did you ever receive any results back from that yourself personally?
Yes, ma'am. I received a package back from them on May 14th.
All right. And did you hand that over to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
And then direct your attention to April 16th of 2020. What else did you do?
I recovered a copy of the autopsy photos of Mr. Arbery from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab in Pooler and brought them back and made them part of the file.
And did you document everything you did in this particular case?
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Now, lastly, based on the statements of Greg McMichael. Sure. States Exhibit 302. So, based on the statements of Gregory McMichael after having interviewed him, did you get a feeling for exactly where he went during the incident leading up to the homicide of Ahmaud Arbery?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, and have you previously looked at State's Exhibit 302?
Yes, ma'am.
And is this a fair and accurate drawing of the route taken by Gregory McMichael on February 23rd, 2020?
Yes, it is.
At this time, the state would tender into evidence State's Exhibit 302.
No objection.
No objection, right?
No objection.
It's admitted.
They're showing you State's 302. So Detective Marcy, when we're over here, what do we have at this location right here? And I'm going to actually use my fingers since the person's not working. What are we looking at here?
That's 220 Still Drive,
All right, and then down here, what do we have?
the McMichael's residence.
And so, where do they go? Or where does Gregory McMichael go?
Continuing straight, they go down Burford. They follow the turn at the very end past Mr. Bryan's house, and they follow the left up Zellwood, and follow that all the way around to Holmes Road, where they then take another left.
You come down here?
Yes, ma'am, and this is where the incident concludes.
All right, so with regard to Burford Road, do you have any clear indication from Gregory McMichael, due to your interview with him, how many times he went back and forth on this particular road?
We have, from his statements, the initial interaction where Mr. Arbery stops, turns, and runs the other way, and he follows on foot before getting back in the truck, and then the truck proceeding around to Zellwood to Holmes.
All right. And here, do you have any indication of him coming down here, if they stopped at any point in time here to confront or yell at Mr. Arbery to stop?
From our interview, the only spot I'm familiar with is where they are finally stopped, and the final incident occurs where we have the red X at.
Right. I may have 1 moment. Your Honor, this time I will go ahead and pass the witness.
For the defense.
Ms. Dunikoski, could we put that back up? I don't know how to use that.
I can do it.
Thank you. The last. Thanks, Jason. Is it investigator or detective, Marcy?
Investigator.
Investigator.
Either way
Marcy.
works.
We have only met just for about 5 minutes earlier today for the
Yes.
first time, right?
Yes, sir.
Let me introduce you to my wife and co-counsel, Laura Ho.
Yeah.
She and I represent Greg McMichael, okay?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm going to talk to you about 3 topics that you've covered today with the jury. And let's start with the suspicions that you and Greg McMichael talked about that he had regarding Ahmaud Arbery, okay? Ms. Dunikoski asked you on direct during your interview if he used the words burglary in connection with his suspicions about Mr. Arbery. Remember that?
Yes, sir.
And she talked about, did he say he saw a burglary? And you said no. right? Yeah.
There have been a lot of questions, I'll take your word for it.
Well, the gist of it was to suggest that in your interview with Mr. McMichael, he's saying, he's not using the word burglary or theft in connection with what he saw with his own eyes, right?
Correct.
All right. Now, you knew when you interviewed Mr. McMichael that he had been a law enforcement officer like you, right?
I knew he was an investigator with the district attorney's office.
And that meant that you knew that he knew something about probable cause and suspicions, and you were talking to him.
Cause for speculation on this officer's part as to what Mr. McMichael knew or didn't know.
Well, they talked about that in their interview.
Well, let's couch it in those terms as opposed to what he may think Mr. McMichael may have known.
All right, we'll get to what you two talked about then. So let's talk about those beliefs, and what I want to do, you got your transcript right there?
Yes, sir.
What I want to do is use that with you to provide some further context for the jury regarding the comments Greg McMichael made to you during that interview, okay?
Okay.
So let's start at page 8. And I want to start with you at line 13. I'll do the reading, and what you can do is just affirm for the jury that these words I'm reading to you are in fact the words on the transcript, okay?
Yes, sir.
So you are interviewing Greg McMichael, and there at line 13, he's saying to you, anyway, back, getting kind of ahead of myself, we were aware that there had been numerous entering autos and break-ins and such in the neighborhood going on for quite some time. That's what he said to you?
Yes, sir.
Continuing. And of course, this guy what was on video was, logic tells you this guy may be the one that's doing it, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, that would be a suspicion that he had, that this guy is the one doing it, referring to burglaries, break-ins, auto thefts, and that sort of thing, right? That's what you're talking about.
Yes, sir.
Now go to page 11. And this is a bit longer part of the conversation. I'm going to read it with you. Again, there at the top of page 11, line 1, Greg McMichael is talking. It's just the two of you in the room at this point, right?
Yes, sir.
And he says to you, and you know, the first thing that comes to mind is this guy that's been breaking into this house down there that they got video, you know, may have been roaming the neighborhood and saw the thing. And he's talking, when he says the house, this house down there that they got video, was it at that point you understood he was referring to the English house, the one at 220 Satilla Drive that was under construction?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And he's referring to video from that house, some of which we've seen here today during your testimony, right?
That was my understanding, yes, sir.
Okay. Continue on, you ask him, so this is not just this month it's been going on, right?
Yes, sir.
And he says to you, oh, this has been going on, and the two dashes would suggest that sometimes you two interrupted each other. That's what a transcript says, right?
Yes, sir.
And so he says, oh, this has been going on, interruption, and you say, last month, this has been going on for months? So far, so good?
Yes, sir.
And he says to you, 4 months, yes, right?
Yes, sir.
And you say, going back into 2019?
Yes,
right?
sir.
And he says, oh, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
And you say, by a good bit? And I guess what you mean by a good bit, going back a good bit?
Yes, sir.
From February 23, 2020, when this interview's happening. That's what that meant, right?
Yes, sir.
And he answers, yeah, so anyway, so now we've got a missing weapon and the possibility in my mind that the guy that's been breaking in down the road there may have that weapon. That's what he's telling you he's thinking, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
And you say to him, possibility, and that's your subjective opinion? And that's right, that's what you asked him, right?
Yes, sir.
And he says, that's my, just a hunch. I was a cop for 30 years, you know. And you say, right.
Yes, sir.
And then he says, and then you're interrupt and say, was a hunch but a lead, right?
Yes, sir.
And he says, right, exactly.
Yes, sir.
And continuing on, page 12. And you said, we've got that intuition. Now, by we, you're talking to him saying, we police officers, not you and me personally, perhaps, but.
Correct,
we-
just law enforcement.
We law
and in
enforcement.
general.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
We've got that intuition, and he says to you, exactly. Correct?
Yes, sir.
And you say, I'm on the same page as you, right?
Yes, sir.
And then he says, all right, so I'm out there minding my own business, doing my upholstery job, and I look up, I hear it, I guess I hear it, I don't know. Anyway, I look up, here comes this guy hauling ass, and he's told you the story now. This is the first time through, but he goes through it a few times with you, right?
Yes, sir.
And I mean, he ain't out for no pleasant Sunday jog. He's got it hooked up. That's what he said to you?
Yes, sir.
Like something's on his ass. I don't see anybody chasing him or anything, but I mean, he came out and I watched him, and of course, when he came by, I got a really good look at him, right?
Yep. Yes, sir.
And then he describes short pants. Every time you see him on the video, has short pants on, has black t-shirt on, but white t-shirt, he says.
Yes, sir.
Apparently correcting himself. And he's got short dreads, okay? So, I mean, it's the same guy. That's what he said to you?
Yes, sir.
All right, continuing on with the same topic of suspicions, go to page 24. And we'll start at line 15. Are you with me?
I'm there.
Okay, but 14, just to get the context, he says, but he, referring to this person he suspects, who turns out to be Mr. Arbery, he keeps going back over and over and over again to this damn house. And he's talking, that is, Greg McMichael's talking to you. This is still in the interview, correct?
Yes, sir.
Plus, we've had numerous entering autos and other burglaries and thefts out of yards and that sort of thing throughout the neighborhood, right?
Yes, sir.
So you know he'd be a prime suspect. And he's saying a suspect in his mind. He's telling you that that's what he's thinking.
Yes, sir.
Right? And then he goes on to tell you, but anyway, Diego...
The next section does not fall under the rule of completeness as it relates to the upper portion of this section, Judge. The state would object.
It does complete the context. I can show it to the court if you'd like. It'll be lines 19 through 25.
Starting at but anyway, right?
Pardon?
Starting at but anyway?
Line 19,
Yeah, okay.
yes, to 25, the end of the page.
Yeah, I'm going to sustain it. It looks like it just transitions into the topic that is necessary for completeness on the statement above, so it's sustained. That last paragraph from 18 or 19 down, that just goes into a different area.
Different from Mr. McMichael's suspicions of who the person is that he's just seen run past.
Yeah, that's what I just ruled on. There appears to be a transition there into a different thought, so I'm sustaining it based on what I'm reading from that portion of the transcript that I can see.
Yeah, I'd like to defend my argument that this is in context of his identification of the person he suspects. And without reading any of it, it simply goes into his description of the person he saw as matching the videos that he'd seen.
I understand. I've read it, I've taken it, I've looked at it, and I've ruled on it.
Okay. All right, let's go to page 43. And we're going to start at line 23. And it's still you, Investigator Marcy, talking with Mr. Greg McMichael, still in the interview room. And at line 23, he's telling you, but we got a missing weapon. We got a guy who breaks in, you know, this house down here. You with me?
Yes, sir.
And that's what he was telling you, right?
Yes, sir.
And it's probably, I think, if you'll check with them, I think there's other houses that they're pretty certain this guy's broken into as well, and entering autos. There's been all kinds of damn shit stolen. That's what he says to you.
Yes, sir.
And then you say to him, we're about to dump everything that's ever happened in that neighborhood, right?
Yes, sir.
And dump mean investigate.
Go through our records system. Yes, sir.
And he says, yeah, and you say, and see if we, and then he interrupts you. And then he says, but anyway, in my mind, there's a good possibility this guy's armed. That was my thought process and my intention. And I know it was my son's as well, was to stop this guy so that he could be arrested or be identified at the very least.
Yes, sir.
Okay? Now, the state also asked you on this section right here if they ever stopped chasing and just went home when they read for you on, or you read on page 45, line 6, where Mr. McMichael's telling you they are yelling at him to stop, and Greg McMichael says to you he wasn't having none of that. In other words, it didn't look like he was going to comply and stop at all, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's go back to the previous page at line 14. That's page 44, line 14, and this is in the same context. And Mr. McMichael says to you, you know, if he had turned around and said, hey man, I'm, you know, Joe, I live around the corner, and you know, I'm just out running, you know, it would have been a whole different ball game. He's telling you that?
Yes, sir.
But there,
What page are we on?
44, line 14.
Thank you.
it would have been a whole different ballgame. And there was no doubt, especially his actions. When we would get up next to him, I mean, I was as close from here to the wall from him. Now the wall, you're in a small interview room, and the wall is just a few feet from you, right?
Yeah, you could just touch it. It's
that close.
Yes, sir.
I'm in the back of the pickup truck, and he has no intention of stopping.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then let's flip over on the same topic to page 65. Now this is when investigator Noah Healy has come into the room, and the two of you are now talking briefly with Mr. McMichael. You remember that part when he showed up?
Let me get there with you.
Page 65, and I'll start at line 7.
I'm going to object. I'm objecting based on the fact that this is a suggestion by Officer Noah Healy, and it has nothing to do with the sections around it. And it's not the words of Gregory McMichael, it's Gregory McMichael agreeing with something investigator Noah Healy is putting out there on page 65.
Well, that's not exactly accurate. We would like to see it, Your Honor.
No, because it sounds like it goes to Wade anyway. I mean, you can go ahead and redirect it
Okay.
and clarify.
Okay, so Investigator Marcy, we're at page 65, line 7. And Noah Healy's come into the room with you and Mr. McMichael. You remember that?
Yes, sir. I don't believe this is me. I believe this is a typo on who was speaking. The
Oh,
words
it's a
are
typo.
correct, but the typo saying Investigator Marcy versus Investigator Noah Healy, I believe this is a typo on the investigator.
What line are you talking about?
10.
Where it says Investigator Marcy?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You're saying that's a typo, it should be Investigator Noah Healy?
Yes, sir.
All right. A year later?
This time I was downloading the phones.
All right, so you're saying that the transcript is inaccurate here, and that it should have said Investigator Noah Healy.
Yes, sir.
All right, now, the state asked you early on if you had reviewed the transcript,
Yes, sir.
and asked you if it was an accurate account of Mr. McMichael's words while he was in that interview room?
The words are correct. The spoken words are correct, but
Okay.
the investigator identity is typo is mistaken there.
All right, and this is your interview with Mr. McMichael, so we'll continue. And we'll just do the part where Mr. McMichael is talking. And for context, the subject we're talking about is...
Objection. First off, I believe the page we're on, Detective Marcy is not even in the room, so going into this right now, when Hilly's in the room, talking to Greg McMichael would be inappropriate.
Yeah, if I can defend, the transcript says Investigator Marcy. And we received this in discovery from the state. And as you know, Your Honor, we've talked about with the state what parts can be read. And I'm looking at an agreement in yellow highlighted that this is a part that can be read. And I can show it to the court.
No, I don't doubt it, but the investigator has indicated that he wasn't present for it. So I'm not sure,
Well-
even with the mistake in the there's a way to work around that, but if he wasn't present for it,
Well, I didn't know, I just saw his name and I just found out right now that he's saying that's not him. So I'm learning that right now. So if there's a way around it, other than me just asking him, are these the words in the transcript Mr. McMichael said on a videotaped interview that he's reviewed, that would be the way to work around it in my view.
well, the state's made an objection, so.
Yes. This transcript was created by the state and approved and proofread by the defense before it was ever handed to this detective, first off. Secondly, yeah, there's a typo. The state agrees that this is not Investigator Marcy. That's wrong. I don't know why none of the lawyers ever caught this.
Ms. Domkowski, hold on just a second, hold on. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could please have you take a step outside.
All right for the jury. Please be seated.
Is No Hilly going to be testifying?
Yes, he's the next witness. That's why I didn't know if there was a problem.
Well, I didn't know he was the next witness. If that's the case, I can do it with him. I didn't know it was not him till just now.
My apologies, Your Honor. Ms. Donikowski informed me that Hilly would be the next witness. Over the lunch break, I forgot to notify Mr. Hogue. My apologies.
Well, you don't have to tell me who their witnesses are. I'm cool with that.
Thank you for falling on your sword, Mr. Goff. Unnecessary at this point. You live to talk another day. Okay.
Well, if that's the case, I'll just wait and do it with him then. Just that one little section is all I was going to do. Unless, knowing that I would do that, would it be a problem just to do it with him? If so, I'll do it with No Hilly.
Please do it with No Hilly.
Okay, I'll do it with No Hilly. And I've just got one more area with Investigator Marcy, and I'll be done with him.
Okay. Figured it could be solved. Let's go ahead and get the panel.
All rise for the jury. Please be seated.
All right, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Like I said, appreciate your patience when we had these short breaks, but we've resolved what we need to resolve, and I believe we're ready to continue.
All right, Investigator Marcy, thank you for that correction. That's not you, that's No Hilly, who's talking at this point on page 65, correct?
Yes, sir.
Uh-oh, I thought we were missing one.
Oh, I'm sorry, that seat's blocked. Yes. Thank you.
We have one more juror.
All right, we're back on.
Okay, Investigator Marcy, we were just establishing that it was No Hilly and not you, page 65, where I was just about to ask you about a portion of the testament, or the statement by Mr. McMichael, right?
Yes, sir.
And you and I just learned that No Hilly's the next witness, so you and I are going to skip this and go to a different area. So I want to go to page 35. This is the last topic I'm going to cover with you.
Yes, sir.
Now, page 35, starting at line 21. Now, this is part of what you testified to on direct. The statement that Mr. McMichael said to you that the state brought out, that he was in the back of the truck with his 357, right?
Yes, sir.
And I want you to read, because they went down to line 25 where he says, I said stop, you know, I'll blow your fucking head off or something. I was trying to convey to this guy, we're not playing, you know. You remember talking about that earlier?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, I want you to go back and read silently to yourself lines 21 down to 25, and let me know when you're done.
Yes, sir.
And then I want to go over to page 36, line 3, and I'm going to go ahead and add out loud 2 more lines. Mr. McMichael's saying to you, well, the guy, I'm trying to...
Correction. This is not part of the rule of completeness. This does not go with the section just read.
It does, Your Honor. I can show it to you.
Yeah, let's see what you got.
You want to see it?
Yep.
It's just the part I have highlighted in yellow.
Can you give me 35?
Yeah, it's just that part that I've highlighted in yellow.
Right, but the previous, just so I understand where we are.
Yeah, 35, that's
I do.
34.
It's 34.
Yeah, I'm sorry, this is 35 and 36. I'm objecting to what's on 36.
I know, he asked me
Correct.
for 34.
Oh, okay.
So I just gave it to him.
So it was just, what was just read and came off of 34.
You see the dark yellow?
Yep.
That's what the state read. And then the lighter yellow on those 2 lines.
I'd
is
say,
what
all right, I thought you were dovetailing in from, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, that's fine. That's over with.
So, Investigator Marcy, he overruled.
So I'm still confused. Which part?
It's just, it's 2 lines as I understand it.
That, no, remove that to himself.
Okay, I understand. Thank you, Judge.
Okay, so we're at 36. This is right after this statement we just heard. I was trying to convey to this guy, we're not playing, you know. And then he says to you, well, the guy, I'm trying to think what happened next. It was a blur. See that?
Yes, sir.
Now, what I want you to do, so we can talk about the context of this statement about blowing his head off, is read from line 4 to line 15 silently, and let me know when you're done.
I'm there.
You good?
Yep.
Oh, you're a fast reader. Okay, good. Now, given everything you just read, some to yourself and some out loud, beginning on page 35, line 20, all the way down to 36, line 16, and adding to that what we see up on this board that you said earlier where the red bubble with the white X in it
Yes, sir.
is the spot on Holmes Road where the truck was stopped and the encounter with Mr. Arbery occurred when the shooting happened,
Yes, sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
And you said that's the only place on Holmes Road that you were aware from your interview with Greg McMichael that they'd had any contact with Mr. Arbery.
Yes, sir.
right? So now, in light of that and what you just read here, this comment about stop, blowing his head off, would have occurred right there.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, you're aware from the case that also right there at that same place, at that same time, Mr. McMichael is standing in the back of his pickup truck, his son's pickup truck, with a cell phone to his ear, talking to 911 in those final seconds before the fatal encounter with Mr. Arbery.
Yes, sir.
You're aware of all that?
Yes, sir.
And you would agree, would you not, that if a person is remembering or trying to remember the exact words he said, that the best source to know what he said would be a recording of it?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Anything from the remaining defendants?
Yes, sir. Give me 1 second, investigating.
Council needs to move, one of the other council, I can't see the board, but council needs to move. They're welcome to do so. If we could just make sure they don't block any of the jurors.
And we have a challenge here of getting everything in view for everybody, and I will do the best that I can to make it happen. One of the things I wanted just to make sure that I'm on the same page with you is as you were taking some questions from Mr. Hogue, I was taking.
Hold on a second. You just give her room to get past you.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
I can't see any of this stuff, thank you.
You're not going to be able to see it if I move it over here, are you? We'll bring it back later. Okay, it's small, right, that's fine. Okay, but I want to make sure that I'm on the same page with you about your testimony, and so I was taking some notes, and just to the extent that I've gotten my note-taking right, you were talking a lot about generally and very specifically the conversation that you had with Greg McMichael, right?
Correct.
And we were talking in that conversation about how Mr. McMichael was talking with you on the subject of crime in the neighborhood.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that there were entering autos and burglaries and break-ins, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that it had been going on for months, even far back as 2019.
Yes, sir.
The missing weapon and Mr. McMichael's concern or fear that Mr. Arbery may have had that weapon.
Yes, sir.
Okay. That Mr. Arbery was the same guy.
Yes, sir.
Who over and over and over and over again went into the house, the prime suspect, so to speak.
Yes, sir.
There was also some discussion about what Mr. Greg McMichael was at least doing out there that day.
Yes,
right?
sir.
To stop this guy, right?
Yes, sir.
To stop him. Meaning, if you were to open that door and you were to come out and I stopped you, that's what you understand Mr. Greg McMichael meant. To stop this guy, to prevent him from leaving.
Yes, sir.
So that he could be arrested.
Yes, sir.
Figure out who he is, identified.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The discussion that you had with Mr. McMichael also dealt a little bit more generally with theft about where in the neighborhood it had been happening. You recall discussing with him that the thefts had been happening throughout the neighborhood.
I believe that's correct, yes, sir.
Okay. So to say throughout, we have several streets, as you can see from the map up here, and I've got a little bit bigger of a map here. But the streets that you understand to be in the neighborhood are Satilla Drive,
Yes, sir.
Burford,
Yes, sir.
Zellwood,
Yes, sir.
Holmes,
Yes, sir.
and Jones.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you, when talking with Greg McMichael, we're talking about crime that was happening throughout the entire neighborhood, right?
I believe so. I'm trying to remember the word throughout, that's why there's the pause, but I
Fine.
believe
It's
so.
on, if you want to check it,
I will.
it's page 24, line 17.
Yep, thank you for that.
Correct, no problem. And you understood that not only was it happening in homes, but it was also homes as in people's residences, but
Yes,
that
sir.
it was happening out of their cars as well.
Yes, sir.
Objection, form of question. That's not what this officer understands. It's what Greg McMichael said to this officer.
Fair enough. Let's go ahead and couch it in terms of the
Yeah, that's what
transcript.
he said to you,
Yes, sir.
in which then you incorporated into your brain to think about what's happening in this neighborhood, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you also were told that these crimes were happening not just at night, but in the middle of the day.
Yes, sir.
That is a specific thing that you know as an officer, that a lot of crimes happen in the middle of the day,
Yes.
including burglaries.
Crimes doesn't matter what time of day
It
it
doesn't
is.
matter what time. You're familiar that burglaries occur a lot during the middle of the day,
Yes, sir.
okay? Even on Sunday,
Even on Sundays.
especially on Sunday.
Even on,
Even on Sunday,
Even-
okay. So the issue is that as you're beginning to get this information from Mr. Greg McMichael, is it true that you're doing so that you can get an idea of what has been going on in the neighborhood in generally about crime in the neighborhood?
yes, sir.
Okay. So that you can then, as you're investigating this case, try to figure out what exactly happened on February 23rd.
Yes, sir.
What it was that Greg McMichael and Travis McMichael were doing out there that day, right? Why
sir.
were they out there that day, right?
Yes, sir.
Also, because Mr. Arbery is involved in this perceived conflict, you, as you step into this case, are trying to figure out why Mr. Arbery is in the neighborhood that day,
Yes, sir.
right? So in trying to step into a case like this, an investigation like this, you want to try to figure out what is in the minds of these three people, Mr. Arbery and the two McMichaels.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And part of your inquiry is, what is Mr. Arbery doing in 220 Satilla,
Yes, sir.
right? Like, what's the purpose for him being there, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. One of the things that you have learned over the years is how to conduct an interview of a witness.
Yes, sir.
And in your training, you have had some class instruction on how to do that, right?
Yes.
So you were asked initially if you were post-certified.
Yes, sir.
In your post-certifications, you have a large classroom portion of your training that deals with interviewing witnesses. right?
I've had advanced training, basics a little light on the subject.
Okay,
But I've had interview and interrogations through the state of Georgia, as well as interview techniques through FLETC.
okay. These are multiple classes
Yes, sir.
just on the subject of how to ask a person about what happened during a volatile situation.
Essentially, yes, sir.
Right. Interrogation being maybe trying to get the person to.
A little more
admit something.
accusatory, a little higher tempo. Yes, sir.
Okay. But in terms of talking with witnesses, you have become accustomed to witnesses who have been in the middle of a violent situation
Yes, sir.
or a situation that has been very unsettling or upsetting.
Yes, sir.
And would you agree that even though people may be, some of them smarter than others or stronger than others or have greater emotional fortitude, that a traumatic situation can cause anybody to have difficulty in talking about what just happened to them?
Absolutely.
Okay. So in a situation, the teaching that you have is really how to lead that person through the interview.
I'd be careful in the word lead, as in, I don't want to
It's
give
a term
them, I don't want to give them the answers.
If the witness can answer the question before being interrupted?
Yeah, let him ask the question.
As simple as that, lead, I don't want to lead them through and give them the answers, but guide, direct, maybe being a softer term for the same thing, keep them focused on one topic and then move to the next topic.
Right.
So we're not, trying to deal with everything at once, but one bite of the apple at a time.
Right. It's easy to pick up when a person is getting kind of off track and is kind of all over the place.
Yes.
So
Yes.
what you may do is you may say, hold on one second, let's go back to what you were just talking about. And not tell them the answer, but lead them through a set of or series of questions that'll help them break it down for you.
Yes, sir.
And you really control that.
I try to, unless they're going. If they're on a track, let them go.
Right. So as an example, in this case, where Greg McMichael says, we've had burglaries, break-ins, and auto thefts all over this neighborhood. That's something that is recorded, and it's now maintained as the record of what he said.
Yes, sir.
right? But it would be on you to say, hold on, let's talk about the burglaries first, right?
Yes, sir. In general, we're going to try and figure that out.
Okay, and then you could say, just starting with the burglaries, where was it?
Correct?
Okay, and go through it step by step, right?
Yes, sir.
Same thing with auto break-ins,
Yes, sir.
right? You could ask Mr. Greg McMichael, whose auto got broken into? Do you have information? Could you give me the name of that person? Because I'd like to follow up on it. That's something you could ask him?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so to the extent that Greg McMichael is all over the map sometimes in this conversation, you certainly have the ability to slow him down and get him to answer specific questions that may clear up confusion in your mind.
Yes, sir.
Okay. By the end of this conversation that you had with him, though, you were clear that Mr. McMichael had formed a belief that Mr. Arbery was the person responsible for breaking into this house down the street.
Referring to 220 Satilla.
226.
Yes, sir.
And that Mr. McMichael was under the belief that there had been a burglary by Mr. Ahmaud Arbery in that house.
Objection. Former question. In addition, it calls for this officer's, you were under the belief that, he's under the belief that this is what's going on, is inappropriate. We're talking about the words of Greg McMichael right now, not what this officer believes he believes.
What's important, I think, Your Honor, to allow this officer to talk about how he went through his investigations and the decisions that he made. And part of this is him, like he said, determining what was going on. What was Greg McMichael doing that day? What was Mr. Arbery doing in the house that day? For this officer, I think it's important to show that he had made some conclusions as part of his investigation that I think is going to lead to some of the additional things that he did in the case.
Well, then you need to rephrase the question. What these statements are by Greg McMichael. You can ask him what he did next. If that then leads you there, then maybe, but not the way it's currently asked, so it's sustained.
All right. So once you got the information, Greg expressed to you his belief
Yes, sir.
that Mr. Arbery was committing thefts inside that home.
Objection. That is not what Greg McMichael said at all. And paraphrasing this is inappropriate. Either specifically what Greg McMichael said, but to paraphrase it this way is outside, that's for the jury to determine.
Well, I can rephrase it even more specific.
So let's keep to what he actually stated. It's
Okay.
sustained.
Thank you. Greg McMichael told you that Mr. Arbery was the prime suspect of the burglaries that he believed were committed in 220 Satilla.
Taking the full context of the conversation, yes, sir.
Yeah, he used those words,
Yeah,
crime suspect.
he did.
Okay. Now, you then went to gather some additional information or look into Ahmaud Arbery, did you not?
In what way? Like video from out there, yes.
So you gathered, well, there's an objection, so I'll pause.
Objection. Objection to where we're going with this. This is not about Ahmaud Arbery. This is the statements of Greg McMichael.
No, this officer has done more than just take statements of Greg McMichael. This officer is one of the main investigators in the case. I don't understand why we're not allowed to go into other things that he's done.
Well, probably depends on what else he's done, but
I'm going to go
sure
very general.
counsel is aware of the evidence in the case and will ask an appropriate question.
Okay.
At this point, all I've heard is the beginning of it.
Okay. So in terms of you trying to figure out what was going on that day, and Mr. Ahmaud Arbery, you did some investigation into Ahmaud Arbery.
I gathered video from Mr. English and spoke to Mr. Olson about video
Okay. To see how many additional times Mr. Arbery had been in that residence.
to gather video from the 23rd,
Gather-
February 23rd, 2020.
Okay. Did you become aware of Mr. Arbery being inside 220 Satilla on other occasions than February 23rd?
I did through other investigators and the media.
Okay, let's not talk about what the media did, but as an investigator, don't you rely on the subpart investigations of other
Absolutely.
investigators in a case?
Yes, sir.
And that sort of information flows up the chain to investigators like yourself
Yes, sir.
to inform you
Yes, sir.
of what's happened in the case, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you had become aware of other videos wherein Mr. Arbery was in 220 Satilla Shores at night.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you yourself have been inside 220 Satilla Shores at night.
Yes, sir.
You went out there to kind of take a look around to see what it looked like, right?
Yes, sir.
And so when you go into 220 Satilla Shores at night, there are no working lights inside the residence at that point.
No, sir.
Right. There's a street light that throws a little bit of light that way, but other than that, that's the only light.
That's it. Yes, sir.
Okay. And you then walked the entire property at night to determine everything that was there that could be seen, right?
Yes, sir.
When you did that, there was not a boat being kept inside the boat garage.
No, sir.
Okay. That had been removed when you did that.
I recall the boat being at the lift.
Okay. Off, not inside the house.
Not inside the house.
There's
no, sir.
another boat back on the left.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
While we're adjusting, just a reminder before Ms. Burke has an issue, it's nearly 4 o'clock.
We can stop.
Yeah, we can start right now.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, let's just take a 15-minute recess, and we'll come back for continuation of the evidence in 15 minutes. Thank
All
you.
right for the jury, please. Please be seated.
All right, we'll take 15 minutes. I can't remember what the title is, detective, investigator? Investigator, thank you. You can go ahead and step down. I remind you that you're under oath. Do not discuss your testimony during the break with anybody. Yes, sir. All right, you'll be back in about 50, well, in, let's say 10 minutes, and then when we get everybody placed. Thank you. So I'm missing Mr. Rubin. This thing got louder. All right, back on. All right, got all the defendants, most of counsel. Mr. Rubin. Any idea where Mr. Rubin may be? Okay. Before we get started, Mr. Goff.
No, I was just giving the court a heads up. I had brought up the Veterans Day issue before. Under OCGA 1-4-1, we contend that Veterans Day is dies non juridicus. It's a non-judicial day when court can't be conducted. Now, there is an 1888 Georgia Supreme Court case that would beg to differ, Hughes v. Sears or Hamer v. Sears. However, under federal law, it is apparently an open question, although you can't raise it in a habeas. Hudson v. Edge, 218 U.S. District Lexus 105463. Since the Hamer case was decided in 1888, which seems to be what a few cases since then go back to, the federal law, I think, has changed with respect to the Establishment Clause of the Constitution. It would seem that either all of the holidays are not judicial days or none of them are. You can't single out Sunday as opposed to the others. So I'm going to suggest that the court reconsider that issue. And in the alternative, and I'll try and get more information for tomorrow, maybe starting later or having a half day, allowing jurors to attend Veterans Day services in the morning. There's usually one downtown. Just throwing that out there to the court. I would also add, from a purely selfish perspective, if we're going to be in court for a month straight, I think all the parties, maybe even potentially the court, might want a half day or a day off during that period of time to take care of things. I know I was able to get to the dry cleaners this morning, but I have no shirts to wear on Friday unless I can get back there tomorrow. I'm just suggesting that the court consider, in addition to the legal argument, the practical argument that a day between now and Thanksgiving or a half day is going to be essential to everyone. I'm sure there are people in Savannah that might even like to see you during business day, but just bringing that up.
We'll take that all under consideration. All right. Mr. Sheffield, ready to go? All right. Got all the defendants represented by counsel. Let's go ahead and get the panel. Thank goodness.
Cedric, we need you to come back.
I mean, I'm tangled up in cords. Mark's close enough to her to help.
All rise for the jury, please.
I feel like if we shine a bat light, Cedric will appear.
Well, he is monitoring.
I know he is. So Cedric, we need you.
Please be seated.
We've got our count right. We've made sure of that.
All right, good.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready to proceed with the evidence. Mr. Sheffield.
Investigator, when you were talking with Greg, Did you at all get him to draw a map of Sotillo Shores for you to kind of explain what he was doing?
We used Google Maps, and then I did a rough sketch myself. He didn't do it.
Okay. Did you draw a map?
I drew the roads as we're looking at them here, and then had little tick marks showing which way they went.
Oh,
Yes,
did
sir.
you have that with you?
No, sir.
Did he mark on, or did he just talk to you and you kind of drew lines and asked him if this was correct?
He talked to me, and I drew the lines.
Okay, all right, very good. You did not take him out to the neighborhood to walk it with him or ask him to demonstrate anything to you out in the neighborhood, though, did you?
No, sir.
Okay. I think when you said you saw Travis back in the headquarters?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did not do any interview of him, just saw that he had come down to be interviewed by Investor Nohill. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And I think you said when you saw him, he was still covered in his blood.
Yes, sir.
Okay. He was just waiting to be interviewed or to be talked to?
He had gotten brought in by Officer Lewis, and when we saw how he presented with his clothing and blood, he asked to be able to clean up. I called Sergeant Oliver and Investigator Lowry, who were down at the scene, and asked them about that. They gave the go-ahead. We went and photographed to show the state he was in when he brought up here,
Right.
and then allowed him to change.
Okay. He was, otherwise, he was just very quiet.
Yes, sir.
Okay. One of the photographs that you showed us, I want to put it even a closer one. This right here is an injury to the back of his head. That's after let me just rephrase. That's after he's been wiped down with alcohol. Is that correct?
This is after he's been able to clean up,
Right.
but before I brought the alcohol pad to him at the beginning of Greg McMichael's interview.
Okay.
And I don't know what that actually is. I didn't
Okay.
document what the mark is.
All right. This is, all we can say for sure is this is what's left after he's cleaned himself up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And that's there on the back of his head, and then here's what's left after he's cleaned himself on his front left arm.
Yes, sir.
Okay, very good. Now, do you have any experience with Sotillo Shores, the neighborhood itself?
From time on patrol, I've answered a few calls in there and then just rode through on occasion.
Okay. Have you come to learn the makeup of the neighborhood in terms of, like old retirees live there? Are you aware of those kind of details?
I'd be assuming.
Oh, okay, we don't want you to do that. So you've not taken it upon yourself to kind of figure out the age of the people or the families or single people versus married people, that kind of thing?
No, sir. I have the experience with the, I've been in there for 8 calls that Spillman logs. And so I know the demographics on those 8 individual houses I've been to, and then this case. But past that, I don't know the demographic breakdown, finances, anything like
Got
that.
it. So you yourself have gone to 8 specific calls in that neighborhood
Yes, sir.
over 18, 19, and 20?
Since 2015, when we switched over to Spillman's system, and I can search Spillman
Okay.
that way.
So we talk a little bit about this system, but
Yes.
essentially there is a system for Glenn County that keeps track of the calls that come in particular areas, all the way down to the address of
Yes,
the
sir.
call. Okay. And the call type is something that's determined by the operator that takes the call. Is that correct?
Generally, and then it can be changed later. So if something's unfounded and it was listed armed robbery, but it turned out to be a problem with person, the officer can change it later.
Okay.
If appropriate.
All right. And it's essentially just based on what the citizen says that's calling.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, one of the things that we started to talk about was you went into 220 Sotillo to take a look around at night.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And because, is it fair to say you did that because Greg McMichael was telling you what he believed Mr. Arbery was doing in that residence?
Yes, sir. And overall for the case, but
Right.
generally,
So
yes, sir.
it's what by going there, you are looking to determine or to try to understand that somebody may have entered that dwelling with the intent to take something.
We're going in to get a picture, get an idea of what the structure is, what's inside of it. So all facets, not just theft, but also, what state is it in? Is there anything obviously stolen? Is there anything obviously not stolen, completely void? We went in for all those reasons.
Okay, but one of those reasons is to determine if this is a dwelling or a structure that somebody could go in there to steal stuff.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and the idea is you've been told about break-ins.
Yes, sir.
That doesn't require something to get broken. You don't have to kick a door or break a window to make a break-in.
No, it's commonly used for just going in, entering. Yeah.
Burglary, don't have to actually steal something. It's just entering with the intent to steal something.
Objection at this time. This is the law that the court is going to give the jury to ask this officer, or actually to have Mr. Sheffield testify to what the law is and ask this officer to agree if it is inappropriate.
Objection inappropriate, I don't think is a legal objection. The reason I'm asking these questions, though, is because he's investigating, and I want to understand the way he's investigating and the decisions that he's making. So I'm asking him to help me understand that he's going in there to determine whether or not a burglary or some type of intent to enter to steal. That's all.
Okay, well, it's the relevance of defining, that's really the objection. So, you don't need to argue with me either. So it's actually sustained on relevance. As the court has already instructed the panel a number of times, the law will be given to you from the court. And again, what lawyers say is not testimony or evidence in the case. Couched in those terms, you can ask him what he thinks, but let's not go ahead and define it for him.
Okay. So when you're trying to, what are you trying to figure out when you've been told that somebody committed a burglary?
Objection. Facts not in evidence. Nobody's told him that anybody committed a burglary. And so therefore, especially that day, to ask him about this is facts not in evidence, and counsel's trying to testify.
You were told that somebody committed a burglary, weren't you?
I was told he was going in there repeatedly, and break-ins was used, burglaries was used for the neighborhood throughout.
Solid
It's
ground.
sustained because that's Mr. McMichael's statement, and he's already testified that he did not follow up on that. So it's sustained.
Okay. You did not follow up to try to determine if a burglary had been committed at 220?
Objection. Once again, formal question. On what day?
He's already testified to what he did, and you've asked him, it was either you or
I don't know why I'm so confused here, Judge. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm following.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take a step outside.
Please be seated.
Mr. Sheffield?
Yes, sir.
You can agree or disagree with this court. That is your prerogative. But to act in the way that you just did in front of this panel, disrespect, I don't care whether you like my rulings or not, or you like me or not, but in this court, the Superior Court, it is axiomatic that counsel show at least respect for what the court is doing. And what you just did shows a lack of respect for what the court is trying to do here, which is create an environment which is fair to all parties. I would suggest that you take a moment to think about that. I'm going to step off the bench because I found that, I'll just call it rude, all right? I have tolerated a number of things in the courtroom, including, flip charts, writing in the middle of, the jury gets distracted when you were doing the flip charts here, jumping up and moving the boards. I would suggest that you temper some of that very quickly, because it will not be tolerated in this court, and I will leave it at that. I do not need an explanation. I do not need an apology, none of that. But I would suggest that we take a moment and think about the way that you're reacting to the court's instructions and rulings. We're in recess. Thank you.
suit, please.
You said it was what number? 115. 115. First one.
Got it figured out, Cedric?
While we're doing this, may I just perfect the record on one thing?
Yeah, we're back on. All defendants present represented by counsel. Go ahead.
During my cross-examination of Investigator Marcy, who is still here in the courtroom, I had begun to direct him to transcript page 24, line 19 through 25. And that drew an objection. I can't recall the basis of the objection. And I handed the transcript of that section to the court, and then the court sustained the objection. I'm good with all that. All I want to do now is read for the record what it was I was going to have. Otherwise, it's not in the record. So I just want to proffer what I was going
Transcript's in the record.
Pardon me?
Transcript's in the record.
Transcript's in the record.
Oh, it is?
Transcript
Okay.
in.
Very good. So,
Just page and line.
pardon me?
Let's just go page and line.
Yeah, it's page 24, lines 19 through 25. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm ready to go.
All right. All right, we got everybody. All right, witnesses on stand. Let's go get the panel.
All rise with the jury. Please be seated.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are ready to continue with the evidence in the case. Mr. Sheffield.
We were talking earlier about the video, and you were helping us kind of understand what you were looking at.
Yes, sir.
What you were interpreting in the video. I just wanted to make sure that I understood a couple of points from that. You guys have just- okay. Starting here right at around 2:08:25 is when we see Mr. Arbery come into the frame.
Yes, sir.
And what we understand about this is that he's walking,
Based on his gait, yes, sir.
okay? He's walking up to 220 Satilla Shores, the house under construction,
Yes, sir.
and now he's standing in the yard with his hands on his hips, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay? He's looking around, and then he goes into the house.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in a minute, we're going to see Matt Albenzi come up into the frame. And is it your understanding, there we see Mr. Arbery now walking into the larger garage. Do you see where he does that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In a minute, we're going to see Matt Albenzi come up here at the top of the screen. And he's going to kind of make an appearance there between those two trees. And that's where he makes his phone call to 911. That's what you understand.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And when he does that, he is literally standing right in front of 220 Satilla Shores.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you ever go and speak with Mr. Albenzi?
Yes, sir.
You did. And so from Mr. Albenzi, you have learned kind of that he was there to make this 911 call, that he had spotted Mr. Arbery come up to the house when he was in his yard chipping wood. Is that right?
I don't recall what he was doing as far as the referencing chipping wood.
Objection, this calls for hearsay. Mr. Albenzi has not testified yet, so what you've learned from your interview with him at this point in time would be hearsay.
Well, I won't offer for the truth, Your Honor, just to inform this officer as he's moving through his investigation. And
Objection, that
making
workaround
decisions.
hearsay is not a workaround hearsay, it's hearsay.
Still here, so I understand Mr. Albenzi, though, will be available as a witness.
Yes, Judge.
Okay, well, it's sustained, but let's move forward. Go ahead.
Well, I'm not offering it for the truth, so it's not hearsay. So I'm not sure if you're allowing me to proceed under that umbrella. Okay. Okay, thanks. So as we're seeing the video, essentially, let me get the moment to pass. .220 Satilla Shores is located right here. Do you see that?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. And essentially, 220 Satilla Shores comes to the intersection of Jones Road and Satilla Shores. You see that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay. Now that we got the house coming down, let me go to the bigger map. And what we understand, what you understand, is that Mr. Albenzi lives down here on Jones Road, and he simply walked down to the corner of Jones and Satilla,
Yes, sir.
where 220 Satilla is located.
Yes, sir.
Okay, coming down Jones to Satilla, okay? And that's where he stands and makes his phone call to 911.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, in a moment, we're going to see Mr. Arbery run out of the house. Right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And in a moment, what we're going to see is that Mr. Albenzi is actually going to come further out into the street in front of 220 Satilla.
Yes, sir.
Right? And then, as we see him now, he's going to walk down the street towards Greg McMichael's home,
Yes, sir.
which is further up Satilla Drive. So if 220's here, you know it goes by twos, so 22, 24, 26, 28, 30. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so he's walking from in front of 220 up into the direction of Greg McMichael's house.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Walking in this direction towards 230. And when he does that, and we see it through another video, Mr. Diego's video that you were able to collect, when he comes up closer to 230, he goes like this.
Yes, sir.
See when he does that?
Yes, sir.
Kind of indicating that way.
Yes, sir.
And you understand, do you not, that he was communicating to Greg McMichael?
Objection calls for speculation as to what anyone was doing. And for this officer to speculate that Mr. Albenzi is communicating to anyone, speculation is the objection. Relevancy is also the objection.
The speculation, it would be, he was told it, so he wouldn't have to speculate about it, and it's relevant because it's a communicative signal to Greg McMichael, who he interviewed about what he did that day and why he did it.
Objection, counsel's testifying, Your Honor.
I'm not.
It's sustained. We've got Mr. McMichael's testimony on what he thought happened.
Right.
So no, it's sustained.
Okay.
You're asking this witness to speculate on it.
Okay. Greg McMichael told you that he observed Albenze?
I don't recall that. Do we have the, you have a page for?
No, I'm just asking you.
No, sir, I don't recall
I
that.
don't recall that. Okay, that's fair. All right, let me move to another area lastly. We talked briefly, and I'm going to get just back on track with it. One of the things that you said about this data system that collects calls is that a person will call in with a problem, and that will get a called label.
Yes, sir.
One of those call labels is suspicious person,
Yes, sir.
okay? And a suspicious person label can really mean a lot of things in
Yes,
your
sir.
experience.
Yes, sir.
If a homeowner is calling about a suspicious person, that could be somebody who's on their property, a trespasser, right?
Yes, sir.
Or somebody that they're concerned about where they are and what they're doing, essentially.
Yes, sir.
Whether that turns into a break-in or a burglary or an assault or whatever it turns into later, a lot of things begin with suspicious persons.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you attempt to determine the number of those types of calls for Satilla Shores at any point in time?
I'm sorry. Objection.
Well, let's see where this did. If he did, then let's figure out
Yeah,
in what
that's all I'm asking.
context.
Thank you. Did you attempt to determine the number of suspicious persons calls in the neighborhood?
Working with the GBI, we ran reports, and then with me I have a list of all the calls for a time period in Satilla Shores.
And is that something you did pursuant to your relationship or working with the GBI?
The list here is from the prosecutor in this case. This particular work I have here was a request from her that we brought up earlier today.
Okay, okay. Other than what the state has asked you to do here, did you take, after speaking with Greg McMichael, take it upon yourself to look up, or were you asked to look up the number of suspicious calls?
For Greg, I looked up calls related specifically to 220 Satilla.
Okay.
And then when the GBI was looking for data, I assisted case agent with getting CAD reports, written reports, and handed them over to the GBI. I don't have those
That's
stats
okay. I
before
just
me.
wondered if that's something that you did.
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, very good. So you were assisting, and that was continuing into the months after February 23rd.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Similarly, you could get calls for specific things like a burglary. That could be literally the type of a call that you get.
Yes, sir.
Or you could get a trespass call.
Yes, sir.
You could get something called extra watch.
Yes, sir.
Extra watch is when the police are asked to come out and kind of have a presence in the neighborhood.
Yes, sir. It can be a broad spectrum of a whole neighborhood needs some extra watch, or a particular residence. They're asking for a little bit more law enforcement riding by, getting out, talking to a store clerk, stuff like that.
To try to show presence in the neighborhood to deter crime,
Yes, sir.
and to try to follow up on some maybe suspicious activity that people have noted in the neighborhood over a period of time.
It wouldn't be as much of a follow-up if you ran into something great. Otherwise, it's just an extra presence.
A problem person, that's another type of call that you get.
Yes, sir.
That's just dealing with somebody saying, I got a person out here and it's causing me a problem, whatever that problem might be.
Yes, sir.
That's an obvious one. Citizen assist. Citizen assist, is that another way of a person saying, I just need help with something that's happening on my property, in my home?
Could be something simple as some paperwork to a flat tire, anything that law enforcement helps out somebody that's not criminal in nature. And then we have some other specific ones like VIN inspection, so that would be citizen assist, but more specified, so
Okay.
it's pretty broad.
All right. If you're going to do a neighborhood patrol, that means that you have taken it upon yourself to drive and patrol a neighborhood, is that right? Or is that something that you're asked to do by citizens?
It's mixed, so part of what we do is riding through neighborhoods, businesses to be included. We can call out, that we did, we would call it 1081 was the 10 code for it. And it would just mean I'm at this location at this time checking this business or this neighborhood. And it could be for a particular house, it could be for an entire neighborhood, an entire shopping center. And it's just basically a date and time stamp. This officer was there, didn't see anything unusual.
Okay, but it would be at least documented that the officer was out patrolling a particular street
Yes, sir.
or a particular neighborhood, looking for criminal activity or trying to resolve criminal activity in some way.
Yes, sir. So while that's part of the patrol duties as a routine, this would be an affirmative, hey, everybody, I was over here.
Very good, very good. Did you take it upon yourself to look into, I asked you about suspicious persons, but the other types of things, did you pull the call data for a period of time for those types of calls as well?
Yeah, like we talked about for the GBI, yes, and that was for all encompassing,
Okay.
all calls.
And was that at the direction of the GBI? Like, hey, we want to know what's going on in this neighborhood?
Investigator Lowry was working at it,
Okay.
and I'm good at navigating our system, so I began helping him, and then they were handed over to the GBI.
Very good. Okay, thank you. One moment, please, Your Honor. I don't have anything further. Thank you. There may be more questions, though.
Sir.
Okay.
No questions.
No questions. Take me just one second to clear my papers.
Any redirect from the state?
Yes, Judge. All right. So I want to ask you, Investigator Marcy, directing your attention to page 44 of the transcript.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I think you indicated that we're about to dump everything that's ever happened in that neighborhood and see if, because Mr. McMichael's telling you all about these break-ins that are happening, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you dump everything in that neighborhood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. What'd you find?
I have the list from Spillman, so the overall numbers I have here include time past the incident through May 25th of 2020. So saying like however many follow-ups per se would be inaccurate to the time frame of 1/1 of 19 to 2/23 of 20. But I do have a breakdown on the actual reports that an officer took a report for. And I have those by date, and I can be a little more accurate on that if that's a concern.
All right,
Dates.
so I just want to be real clear about this. When you say this on the 23rd of February, 2020,
Yes, ma'am.
did you in February or March or April of 2020 go back and do what you said you were going to do by looking at the neighborhood at that time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. All right, so subsequently then, did you and I have a conversation where I asked you to go ahead and pull that so you could look at it again to refresh your recollection for this case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, in preparation for your testimony?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And At this point in time, did you go through and look at all of those reports to see if Mr. Ahmaud Arbery was a suspect in any case? I want to be real narrow about this. In any case in Satilla Shores from January 1st of 2019 through February 23rd of 20?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, was he a suspect in any of these cases?
No, ma'am.
All right. Also directing your attention to page 44.
Yes, ma'am.
Defense counsel asked you about when Gregory McMichael started saying, you know, if he had turned around and said, hey man, you know, I'm Joe, I live around the corner, I'm just out running, it would have been a whole different ballgame, right?
Yes, ma'am.
So, Mr. Gregory McMichael expected that this man would stop for him.
Objection. She's asking him to get into the mind of Gregory McMichael.
All right. At the end of that, he indicated that Mr. Arbery had no intention of stopping.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Did he ever explain why he believed, I mean, talk about Gregory McMichael, did he ever explain to you why he believed Mr. Arbery had to stop for he and his son?
No, ma'am.
All right. All right, I'm going to direct your attention to page 39 now.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I'm going to talk about lines 14 through 16. All right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I'm going to have you directly quote, and my thought is all the way through earlier.
Okay. Mr. Greg McMichael, and I'm quoting him, he stated, and my thought is he's going after a weapon, you know, because, you know, if he had had a weapon, he'd have probably used it earlier.
Okay. Now, is this in context for the fact that he went up and took Mr. Arbery's arm out from underneath him after he'd fallen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So he's talking about he's laying face down, his right arm's under his body. And Mr. McMichael's thought is he's going after a weapon. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. But then he follows up with, you know, if he'd had a weapon, he'd have probably used it earlier, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So we've got a probably there, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's take a look at this. And here's what I'm going to have you do. You're going to put the page back in. I'm going to have you go through it all. So you might want to underclip it.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you go ahead and go to page number 7.
Okay.
All right, so you saw Mr. Sheffield with his list of all that stuff, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so page number 7, when we're looking at lines 6 through 7, we talked about Mr. McMichael saying Diego had this guy, you know, the video, breaking into or being or wandering around in this house, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we've got all three of these kinds of things going on with wandering in the house, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And then the next page, Mr. Hogue came up and he talked about, in the middle, on line 17.
Yes, ma'am.
So he's talking about numerous entering autos and break-ins, and then he said, logic tells you that this guy may be the one that's doing it.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we've got a may be the one. And he's talking about logic here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so logic, he may be doing it. Then moving forward, we've got page 11.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so he's talking about lines 15, 16. So now we've got a missing weapon and the possibility in my mind that the guy's been breaking in down the road there.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we got a possibility. And then you asked him, possibility, and that's your subjective opinion.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then he says, well, that's just a hunch.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So now we have a hunch. And then going to the next page, you at the top it says, well, we've got that intuition, right?
Yes, ma'am.
And he agrees with you, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we've got intuition. All right, so then the next page, 13. All right, you went ahead and asked him specifically. So you see this guy out today and he's hauling, what are your thoughts?
Yes, ma'am.
And he's thinking he's either done something, or somebody's chasing him, or, maybe somebody drove up and found him in their house.
Yes, ma'am.
Or drove up to that particular house he likes to go into over and over again.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so we have like speculation on 4 different things in that sentence, right?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So I'm going to go ahead and take you to page 24 again.
Okay.
All right. So middle of the page, line 9. You asked him, is he picking up anything, going through anything?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the quote Mr. McMichael says at that point?
Quoting Mr. McMichael says, not that I recall, I don't think the guy has actually stolen anything out of there, or if he did, it was early on in this process.
Okay, so if he did.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Not knowledge that he did, it's if he did.
Yes, ma'am.
So we got an if. Plus we've got an I don't think the guy's actually stolen anything out of there.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. And then he says he keeps going back over there, and then he goes, plus we've had numerous entering autos. And then that's when he says, this guy would be a prime suspect.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so now we've got prime suspect. But you found that Mr. Arbery was not a suspect in any crime in Satilla Shores from January 1st of 2019 through February 23rd of 2020.
Your Honor. Earlier, there was an objection to the question about whether this witness had ever investigated the burglaries or any of the enterings at 220 Satilla Drive. And that is right before we took the break. And the state said that
I would object to the speaking objection.
Finish the thought then.
And the state said that this witness had testified he did not investigate any of those break-ins at 220 Satilla Drive. So for that reason, she's now asking him whether he has confirmed that or disconfirmed it. This is not appropriate.
The state just asked him about page 44. We're about to dump everything that's ever happened and see if and I asked him specifically, did you dump it? He said yes. I said, did you find Mr. Arbery as a suspect in any crime? And he said, no, I didn't find Mr. Arbery as a suspect in any of those crimes.
That's on the record, so what's the question now?
So the question now is, now I can't remember what my question was.
Well, that probably solves the objection.
All right, I'll move on.
It's sustained then.
Thank you.
It's getting late. All right, okay. All right, and then I'm going to direct you to page 43.
I'm there.
All right. Once again, Mr. McMichael's talking about that my son had a missing pistol. I'm pretty certain this guy, well, I don't know for a fact, and I have no reason to think that he did it. Is that what he said?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So he doesn't know this for a fact and has no reason to believe he did it with regard to the missing pistol. So in contrast to what Mr. Sheffield put up, we've got probability, maybe, possibility, hunch, logic, intuition, speculation, and if. These are all the things he's telling you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right. He didn't provide you with any concrete, specific evidence or facts at all about the neighborhood and what was going on with it, except for the open, unsecured construction site at 220 Satilla Drive, right?
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
And he was able to tell you about that place, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So it wasn't anything keeping him from giving you specifics, because he gave you that specific.
Next meeting, Your Honor, there's several questions.
That's the statement.
Give me one moment. I will go ahead and pass the witness, Your Honor.
So it was Greg McMichael first.
Yes, just a recross. Just briefly, Investigator Marcy, I promise. You've been in law enforcement, remind me, how many years now?
Over 10 years.
Okay. So you are very well familiar with the concept of probable cause, are
Yes.
you not?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to object to this entire line of questioning. We're going to talk about probable cause with this officer. Once again, a legal concept to be given to by the court, and I object on that basis.
Let's get to the question.
You're familiar with the concept of probable cause.
Yes, sir.
And in your own work in law enforcement, you have developed probable cause to suspect people of crimes on many occasions, have you not?
Yes, sir.
And in many of those occasions, your probable cause allowed you to conduct an arrest of the person,
Yes, sir.
charge them with a crime,
Yes, sir.
and then let prosecutors determine whether to charge or not.
Yes, sir.
And some of those times, your probable cause turned out to be the end of the case. There were no charges, the case was over. Sometimes.
I don't know the disposition of all of my cases. I know some have been I've dismissed one myself when I found new evidence.
Right. In other words,
In generally, I would say yes, I guess.
in generally what?
Generally, I would say yes, I guess. I don't, as far as felony cases especially, I don't know the disposition of all of them. They're not reported back to us.
Well, the point is this, you develop reasons based on information that you turn into probable cause to make an arrest,
Yes, sir.
and sometimes that's the end of the case, and sometimes it goes on to prosecution. That's the way it works, right?
In general, yes, sir.
So in this interview with Greg McMichael, you're talking to him knowing that he also was in law enforcement.
Yes, sir.
And because you knew that, did you make the assumption about him that he also understood probable cause?
Objection, speculation, and relevancy is to an assumption made by this officer about anything Greg McMichael knew or understood.
I'll go with your ruling, Your Honor, whatever it is.
That's sustained.
Okay. Well, so when the state just went through words with you like logic, possibility, hunch, intuition, they left out lead. You also told in your interview with Mr. McMichael that you thought it could be a lead, that he had a hunch and you called it a lead and he agreed with you. You remember that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. and if, and I don't think, and so forth. He also told you, did he not, that he was certain about some things, like on page 44, you still have your transcript?
I do. I'm on 44.
Page 44, line 1. He was telling you, I think there's other houses that they're pretty certain this guy's broken into. Certain. The guy he's talking about is Ahmaud Arbery, right?
I think there's other houses that they're pretty sure this guy being Mr. Arbery. Yes, sir.
Okay. And he called him a prime suspect at one point.
Yes, sir.
All right. And a suspect would be basically somebody you suspect of having committed crimes, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, sir. That's all I have.
Sorry, you were asked about investigating crime in the neighborhood to determine whether or not Mr. Arbery was involved in those crimes, was the question that you were asked, correct?
Reviewing the cases to see if he was a suspect.
Reviewing
Is
the
what I
cases.
recall, yeah. So looking at the cases that we have in Satilla Shores
Okay.
prior to the incident and seeing if he was listed as a suspect or could be a suspect, yes, sir.
All right. Did you review the burglary case at 405 Holmes Road, Satilla from 7/1/19?
What was the date you had was July 1st?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
The 159 Zellwood Drive theft on 12/28/19?
Yes, sir.
The entering auto theft on 135 Zellwood Drive on 12/8/19?
Yes, sir.
And when you say you reviewed this, you're saying you reviewed that something had happened, something was stolen, right?
I pulled up the report and got a broad overview of the general what happened.
But in those cases, there was no arrest made on any suspect?
No, sir.
Yeah, so it's unknown who the suspect was?
Correct.
Okay. The suspicious person call from 7/13/2019 at 230 Satilla Drive, did you review that case?
From 7/13 of 2019.
Right.
What was it labeled as?
Suspicious person call.
The only suspicious I have were in May of 2020. If it was, you know the case number G20 or G19
Well, how about this? If you're saying you don't have any suspicious person cases that you've reviewed, is that what you're saying, other than the one in May of 2020?
No reports that I reviewed. There may be CAT events, which is a report wasn't done. So I may have information here to say it was closed out and the time,
Yeah.
but
Okay, so there's a suspicious person call on 7/13/19 for 230 Satilla Shores. Did you determine who the suspicious person was?
no, sir, it's closed out. I didn't review the CAT details for that.
And this happens a lot, right? People call the police and say, we see somebody on our property, right?
Yes, sir.
The person has actually taken the time to call 911 because they're concerned or worried or scared,
Yes, sir.
right? And then somebody either comes out and doesn't find the suspicious person, right?
Yes, sir.
Or they can show up and find the suspicious person.
Yes, sir.
right? Okay, so you said you have one suspicious person call for May of 2020. I've got other ones for 2019. Are you saying that you have determined?
Counsel's testifying at this point about what he's got.
It's fine, I'll make a question, Your Honor.
Yeah, well, sustained.
Are you saying that you reviewed the suspicious person case on 7/18/19?
Objection. So right now, facts not in evidence about any of these cases.
Your Honor, the question I'm asking him contains a subject matter and facts in it, and I'm asking him to tell me if he knows about it and did anything about it. The state has opened this door by asking him about his review of crime in the neighborhood and whether he's determined whether any of that crime is related to Mr. Arbery. So I'm following that.
It's sustained. The objection, as I understood it, to the state's direct questioning about particular incidents was that the records weren't certified and didn't know what they were. So without those records, it's sustained.
In terms then of what the state was just asking about whether he made determinations of incidents that Ms. Dunikowski asked him to look at, that he's now testified about. We're not seeking to admit those records. That would be hearsay.
You're testifying to them.
I'm
You
asking
can ask him
if
whether
he-
he's familiar,
Yeah.
what he's familiar with, but
Okay.
you're testifying to records.
Okay.
And,
Are you familiar with the suspicious person's call on 8/23/19?
I'll say, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Oh.
So it's sustained for the same reason that your objection to the state was sustained.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. You may step down. Don't need to remind you. You are going to be released for the day, but you are subject to recall.
Yes, sir.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're at a good breaking point for the day. So we're going to go ahead and recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Again, during the recess, do not discuss this case amongst yourselves or with anybody else. Don't go looking for any information about the case. Don't let anybody talk about the case in front of you. Again, with newspapers and news feeds, make sure you're not looking at any newspapers, not looking at any news feeds about this case. With those instructions, again, all the other instructions I've given you up to this point, thank you for your time, thank you for your service here in Glenn County, and we'll see you back tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Have a good night.
All rise with the jury.
All right, jury's clear, you can be seated. Anything from the state before we recess?
Nothing from the state, Your Honor.
Anything from Travis McMichael?
Yes, Your Honor, just one moment. Thank you. Other than just being able to avail myself to the court reporter to make a record of what the court has sustained the state's objection on, I don't have anything further, Your Honor.
Anything from Greg McMichael?
No, sir.
From Mr. Bryan?
No, Your Honor.
Okay.
I'm not going to argue with the court's ruling. The record I'd like to make, Your Honor, is that I think the jury has been left with the impression that this officer has been asked by the state to determine if, in his opinion, in looking into cases involving allegations of criminal activity in Satilla Shores, whether he has determined that Ahmaud Arbery was the person who committed those crimes. And he answered, I have looked into cases through this time period, and I have determined that Ahmaud Arbery was not a suspect in those crimes. What the state has done through that line of questioning has informed the jury that Ahmaud hasn't committed any crime in Satilla Shore neighborhood. What I want to do with this witness is to test the boundaries of his investigation and to ask him about all of the other calls that happened in that time period to establish that he's not credible or to impeach him with the fact that there are a lot of other issues that were ongoing that the police were called about that he didn't investigate and he doesn't know the answer to. So the state said that the jury is not left with the impression that he's resolved this issue. Also, I wanted to ask him about investigating 220 Satilla Shores as well. So I have a list of cases here that are all suspicious persons cases. I was going to ask them about the date and the address and whether he investigated. My thought is it's admissible, and it's not me testifying, if I ask this officer, did you investigate a suspicious person call at this address on this date? He can say, I'm not aware of that, or I didn't do it. My question is not testimony. I could ask him, were you aware of a suspicious person on this call on this date? And he could say no. But just because the question has details in it and facts in it doesn't make me testifying. So I would like to put on the record, Your Honor, which I think you're giving me the opportunity to do right now, that there was a suspicious person call at 230 Satilla. I think I already mentioned that one. There was suspicious person call at 168 Zellwood on 8/23/19. There was suspicious person call on 156 Zellwood on 10/19/19. There was a suspicious person's call on 140 Zellwood on 10/20/19. There was a suspicious person call on 201 Satilla Shores 11/7/19. There was a suspicious person call on 11/7/19 at 201 Satilla. Another suspicious person call on 11/17/19 at 220 Satilla. Another suspicious person call on 11/30/19 at 119 Zellwood. Another suspicious person call on 11/30/19 at 119 Zellwood. That appears to be the same one I just mentioned. There's another suspicious person call on 418 Holmes Road on 12/13/19. Another suspicious person call on 12/17/19 at 219 Satilla Drive, which may be in mistake for 220 Satilla, which we know there was suspicious. Oh, actually it's not. We have a suspicious person call for 220 on 12/17/19, but we also have one at 219 Satilla on the same night and date. Suspicious person call at, it says reporting area Satilla Shores on 1/14/20. A suspicious person call on 1/15/20 at 211 Satilla Shores. A suspicious person call at 2/13/20 at 178 Zellwood. And finally, a suspicious person call on 2/13/20 at 119 Zellwood. Thank you, Your Honor.
If I may be heard.
Your Honor, I'm concerned.
So the record's clear. Based on what?
Sorry?
Based on what?
What do you mean?
You just went through a bunch of,
Oh, these are CAD reports.
okay. Are they certified?
Your Honor, if we were seeking to admit them,
Okay.
but they're not.
So-
No, these are what we obtained from the Glenn County Police Department. These are records that we obtained through open records request, through our investigator. We have gotten certifications for a lot of things. We have not gotten, I don't believe, certifications. No, we have not gotten certifications for these. I'm not seeking to admit them into the record. I'm seeking to use them to ask the witness questions. I can, use any document if a witness doesn't remember to refresh, but these are not certified. Sorry, that's the brief answer to your question.
Well, again, court's clear about where I am on it. It's unclear when the witness was on the stand where this was coming from. It was not explained to the court. I'm not sure that my ruling changes at all. But the objection that was made earlier to the state's very similar questions about what the investigator looked at, led the court in the direction we went. So if there's other ways to get that in, you're welcome to do so, but not with this witness, not the way that you were doing it.
Right, and just, may I respond?
Yes.
I appreciate it, Judge. The objection earlier was that he was testifying to conclusions that others made based on their investigation. What I understand he was doing was reading something that somebody else did, and he was going to testify as to what he learned or whatever. My questions were, did you investigate something? Not what did you conclude, or just are you even aware, sir, that these things, that these were calls in the neighborhood to help the jury understand that he's looked at a very small area of complaint in the neighborhood? That's all.
Mr. Goff.
My concern is with the position put forth by the state, and I'm not trying to go down memory lane, that Ahmaud Arbery was not identified as a suspect in any crime in this area. It feels to me that that is opening the door to 404B evidence in this case, particularly when we know of a theft where he was, I believe, more than a suspect just up the street. We also know that there were thefts and other break-ins in other neighborhoods in the area. And I don't think the state gets to come in and say that Ahmaud Arbery was not a suspect. First of all, it's misleading. If you don't have any suspect, which is true for most property crimes, then it's a meaningless statement to say that he specifically is not a suspect because he didn't have any suspects. It's not like they actively ruled him out as a suspect. We know that he was not identified for hours, if I recall correctly, after his death. If I recall correctly, the state put in evidence that he was identified by fingerprints at the time. Obviously, if there had been specific attention on him, it wouldn't have taken hours to identify the body. But at the same time, it's misleading the jury for the state to be telling the jury that he had never been identified as a suspect, when we all know, because we're familiar with this process, why that means nothing. But now we've put that out there, and either I think it opens the door, or I think the court needs to come in tomorrow and give a curative instruction so that we can dissipate that taint. That is backdoor, and I'm not saying that the state was intentionally trying to do that, but the effect is it's backdoor character evidence in favor of Mr. Arbery. And I'm sitting here frustrated. With all respect, he's not my witness. He never talked to my client. This has all got nothing to do with my client. But again, when it comes to severance issues, my client is taking the spillover of what I'm not questioning to be a legitimate examination. But again, it's coming back on my client in a way that I have no way to remedy or address. And I'm troubled by it. And I would ask the court to ponder overnight the possibility of a curative instruction to put this issue to rest. That or rule that 404B is open, and any evidence that he's a suspect or involved in other thefts, certainly in the time frame in the geographic vicinity, should be admitted.
We join on that. There's been mentioned that he's not associated with any of these thefts in that time period. We have witnesses in his neighborhood that will testify that they observed him trying to remove screens on windows and enter into structures, and that he was involved in thefts up the street at the gas station and the grocery store. And so to leave the impression that now the police have not identified Mr. Arbery with any thefts is misleading, and it does open the door.
On behalf of Greg McMichael, we do join, Your Honor, and I also point out that the state has cross-examined two of the witnesses. I'm pulling up my notes. Direct examined two of his witnesses with respect to the amount of crime there was in Satilla Shores. At one point, there was an objection that I made that was sustained when the state was trying to characterize it as a very limited amount of calls that the Baker 9 area would receive. So it's obvious that the state is trying to convey and present as much evidence that they deem proper to the jury that this was not an area under some siege of property crimes, which we're going to be able to show is not the case. Part of that are these reports, and part of that will be the information from those residents themselves that were victims of those crimes, and also the communication that those residents of Satilla Shores had with each other. So for that reason, we do join in Mr. Bryan's motion, and we join as well in the preservation of the objection that Mr. Sheffield made.
Thank you, Your Honor. With regard to page 43, at the bottom, line 23 through 25, into 44 at the top, the state didn't bring this up. The state didn't start this. The state actually didn't tender those sentences before this jury. The defense did. The defense opened this door with this. But we got a missing weapon. We got a guy who breaks in, this house down here, and it's probably, I think, if you'll check with them, I think there's other houses that they're pretty certain this guy's broken into. He's talking about other police officers. Go check with them. They're pretty certain this guy's broken into as well and entering autos. There's been all kinds of damn shit stolen. And Investigator Marcy then says, we're about to dump everything that's ever happened in that neighborhood and see if, and he cuts him off. They opened the door to this statement. They wanted it in that the police knew all about all of this stuff. So what's the state supposed to do? Oh, well, Greg McMichael says the police know all about this stuff and then not rebut it at all. So he says here, I was going to, we're about to dump everything that's ever happened in the neighborhood. And I limited it specifically to January 1st, 2019, because the defense brought out, not the state, about how it went all the way back to 2019. I didn't ask that of any of Parker Marcy at all. The defense did. So at this point, the state's been put on notice that we've got to now address this, something that the state wasn't going to go into in Greg McMichael's statements. So now we've got, it goes back to 2019. So I specifically asked him, January 1st, 2019 through February 23rd of 2020. Did you look at all of this stuff? Because you said you did here. This is part of your investigation. And I want to point out that he's allowed to testify to what he did in his investigation. And he was going to go look to see if Mr. Arbery is a suspect in any of these things. He said he was not. And I left it alone at that, especially after you sustained his objection to me going into specific reports. But they came up on cross and opened this door. And yes, I wanted to make it clear that the police did not have him. I think there's other houses that they're pretty certain this guy broke into. And he's talking about law enforcement. And that is why they were going to dump everything. So we ask you to not allow them suddenly to go into 404B evidence when they're the ones who brought up this narrow issue and left the state in no position except to try and clarify what it was that this officer did in here to clear up this issue, which is action he took. And we asked him about it. Thank you.
Just a brief reminder of the order of events. Investigator Marcy was on direct examination. No defense lawyer had spoken to him yet. When the state asked him, have we asked you to pull all these records from 1/1/19 until 2/23/20? And yes, I have. And he had a sheaf of papers. And then an objection was lodged, etc. It was only later, after the state had already been prepared to do this very thing, apparently, before we ever asked the man a single question, that this became the issue it is now. So it's just not quite accurate that we opened any door when we hadn't even cross-examined him yet, when the state brought this out on direct examination, as I recall.
I think we're arguing two different things. And I understand what you're saying. Mr. Goff, it was your motion, so final word.
Roddy Bryan didn't open any doors. I don't think I've asked a single question all day. I think I made one objection all day. And the court's job here, for lack of a better description, is to ensure that all three defendants get a fair trial, including my client. And I just asked the court to view it not just from the perspective of the McMichael defendants in the state, but from the perspective of Roddy Bryan.
Okay. I'm going to give all of this the perspective of time. Meaning tomorrow morning, I'll put on the record where we are. I've had an opportunity to just go ahead and digest what we got and how we got there. So I understand that addresses all matters then currently before the court. We'll be in recess until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Thank you, everybody.
Good.